I'm now going to ask Ed Davey to set the clock ticking and to speak to us. Ed Davey.
Friends, this is the first Manchester leadership hustings in over 100 years when we've just beaten both the Labour and Conservative parties in a UK-wide election. We are back in the game. But we've had some tough times, haven't we? The 2015 election, the 2017 election, and of course the appalling 2016 referendum. Thanks to you, we fought our way back, and I know you enjoyed delivering all those leaflets. As leader, my top priority now we're back in the game is to win it. And I believe my campaigning history shows that I know how to win. When I first won my seat back in 1997, I wasn't a target seat. I wasn't supposed to win. But we did. We did by determination, but also building a strong team of local councillor campaigners. And we had a simple message: Ed for education. We've got a simple message again: stop Brexit. Especially effective in its Anglo-Saxon form. Voters get it. But my major concern for the campaign to win again is what happens when we've stopped Brexit. Brexit aside, the honest truth is most voters don't know what Liberal Democrats stand for. My top task as leader will be to make sure voters do know what we stand for. Our late great friend Paddy Ashdown used to say he'd sell his grandmother for a brand image for the party. But his grandmother had already died, and so he just worked at it. And under Paddy, we became known as the party of education. I believe, given my history, we can become the party of the environment. For my political journey began before I was Liberal Democrat, as an environmentalist, after I'd read Seeing Green by Jonathan Porritt. Seeing Green alarmed me that humans could be so poisonous to our own home. And the politician who spoke to me most about how we could get planet survival was Paddy Ashdown, and I joined the party in 1989. So just imagine how this environmentalist felt when I became Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change in 2012. For 3 years, I ran for renewables. I nearly quadrupled Britain's green power. We became the world leader in offshore wind. And then in Europe, for 3 years, I ran a campaign across the European Union to get the most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets possible for 28 countries, and I did. And through Europe to the UN, we negotiated hard and ultimately got the Paris Climate Treaty. I get climate politics at a point when the climate emergency is the most challenging issue for our planet. From rising sea levels and flooding to disease and crop destruction, we have to act. And I'm clear on the key climate fight ahead. It's the economy. I'm an economist by training, and I believe we can turn our economy green. We can decarbonise capitalism. We can switch billions of pounds from fossil fuels and dirty energy into green technology for the future. Because it's right, and because it will win us a whole new generation of voters. Remember those amazing young people striking for the climate? And the Extinction Rebellion protesters? I want them to join us. The environment, climate change, a green economy, these will be winning campaigns for us. But I'm not just a proud tree hugger. I'm a liberal heart, head and soul. From civil liberties to human rights, from internationalism to local democracy. Our liberal priorities and values have never been more vital, not least because they are under threat from the far left and the far right, from xenophobia to transphobia, from anti-Semitism to Islamophobia. These are terrifying times. Times for liberals to stand up and take on the peddlers of fear and division, from Tommy Robinson to Boris Johnson. My record shows I won't flinch from those fights when I moved the amendment to abolish the Tories' vile homophobic Section 28, when I fought for 5 years to get my constituent out of Guantanamo Bay. Let me tell you, there weren't any votes in standing up for an alleged Islamic terrorist. Yet I'm extremely proud that I eventually secured Bishop's release in 2007, not more so when I visit him now, his wife and children. For me, liberalism means standing up for the victims of injustice. So my record on liberalism, on climate change, on campaigning, that's my pitch and my vision. For me, though, it's also personal. I lost both my parents as a child and was a young carer for 3 years, an experience that shaped my life. Years later, Emily and I have 2 wonderful children who now shape our lives, particularly my son, who has very special needs, which need a lot of caring. So I've faced personal challenges. They've made me stronger. But more importantly, they've taught me the importance of caring, how people must be helped when they are vulnerable, how crucial our NHS is. So I want to lead a party that's pro-European, that tackles the climate emergency, but a party that's compassionate, a party that cares for everyone, that heals divisions caused by nationalism and Brexit. As leader, I want our party to reach out to Leave communities, friends with our generous spirits and liberal hearts. We can give our country hope again. Thank you.
And I'm now going to ask Jo Swinson to make her presentation.
Well, I hope the microphone is working. I think it may have been working earlier when I was getting mic'd up, so apologies if you had to deal with April's advice to just pass the microphone up between my boobs. And you also got some great chat about the benefits of a good bra fitting. I'm running for leader of the Liberal Democrats because I think we have a golden opportunity at the moment to build a liberal movement, to take on the forces of liberalism, to take on the forces of nationalism and populism. And the answer to nationalism is liberalism. Now, we have been enjoying very good times recently. Those amazing local election results, the European election results, our best ever with our 16 MEPs, including our 2 fantastic MEPs here in the Northwest. Congratulations to all of you for making that happen. And it is just superb that we are experiencing this surge. And a new MP in our parliamentary party today. But I want to take you back to my worst day in politics, which wasn't the day that I lost my seat in 2015, though my husband and I both being made redundant on the same day with a small baby was certainly up there, it was pretty bad. But it was actually a year later, the morning after the European referendum. And I'd gone to bed in disgust at 4 a.m, and it had been looking not great, but not quite certain, and woke up to see the confirmation that Leave had won. And I turned on the television, and I saw Nigel Farage beaming with his smug grin out of the television screen. Rather regretted having such a big TV. And then he said something that I will never forget. He said, and it was great, we won it without a shot being fired. And I just wanted to vomit. Just a week earlier, a young woman doing her job as a member of Parliament, with 2 young kids, had been cruelly shot, stabbed, murdered in cold blood. And that he could stand and say something like that without a care. That he stood deliberately in front of that breaking point poster, designed to stoke hate and division in our communities. And so when Theresa May called the election in 2017, I knew in a heartbeat that I had to stand, win my seat again from the Nationalists, and take on this fight. And I've never been one to sit on the sidelines. From when I was back at school, when I was campaigning through the petitions at the Body Shop, inspired by the vision of Anita Roddick that business could and should be a force for good, to university when I campaigned for my local fellow residents in my halls to get internet points in every bedroom, to as an MP where I brought forward a bill about excessive packaging and got manufacturers to change their behaviour, to being a minister standing up for some of the most vulnerable people in our society, taking on the payday lenders and rogue employers who don't pay the national minimum wage. Now we have the fight of our lives on our hands to stop Brexit. We need to win a people's vote to have it happen, and then we need to win that campaign. And this is still within our grasp, Liberal Democrats. We can do this. Now, in order to secure and win that people's vote, we need to not only make the obvious economic, prosperity, security argument for the European Union, we also need to make the emotional case. And my experience of winning a referendum in Scotland in 2014 taught me the importance of that. We need to be able to talk about the 3 million European citizens who are our friends, our neighbours, the people who look after our elderly relatives, look after our children, the people we love. We need to talk about the EU's role in securing peace in our continent. And we need to talk about more than Brexit too, because no is not enough in our politics these days. Stopping Brexit on its own is not enough. We need to have a yes that people can buy into. We need a yes, which is about a society that is transformed, where we have zero carbon lifestyles, the way that we live, the way we work, the way we travel. To have an economy that works for the long term, for people and planet. To harness the technological revolution so that it works for individuals and that we value the human in our society. I really believe that here in 2019, with the political system as we know it fracturing, the two big parties under such pressure, we have a huge opportunity now to transform our politics, and in doing so, to transform our economy and our society. And Liberal Democrats, we can build the liberal movement to do this, and we will be at the heart of that. So let's do it. Let's do it now. Let's do it together. Thank you.
The way it works is that the lots were drawn earlier in London to decide which speaker went first and which speaker went second. And it was agreed then that the answering of the questions would be the alternate way round. So for our first question, it'll be Joe who responds first. For our second question, it'll be Ed who responds first, and so on through the whole of the question time session. And one announcement which I didn't make, which I should have done, it shows that I'm not really part of the social media scene, but as the evening progresses, please do remember to use the hashtag LibDemLeadership and the hashtag LibDemSurge, and make sure that your friends and contacts get to know what's going on. Right, our first question is on the National Health Service, the NHS. I'm going to bring together two of the questions which are here. One is, what are the candidates' view on separating out mental health funding from acute services? And then a more general question, what are your plans for funding the NHS? And then, in case you missed anything, what about social care as well? So our first responder, as you might say, is Joe.
Well, I'm going to go to the lectern so that the people who are watching on the stream are able to see more easily. And I don't think you got enough credit for that pun, Andrew, actually, the first responder. I think that was good. That was good. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, our health and the health of those we love is one of the most important things. It's often something we take for granted until something goes wrong. And like everyone in this room, at some point we have relied on the NHS, and I think about the birth of my sons. I think about actually when I was here in Manchester the MRI saving my life when I was actually at a Liberal Democrat event, Paul Ranger's, I think it was his 10th wedding anniversary, and I ate something at the buffet that had nuts in it and had to go to hospital. And as it happens, my brother-in-law was a consultant at the MRI and in A&E and was working that night. So he's a very good doctor, and so I'm still here. And at that time, he was not yet married to my sister, and so he saved my life. So they were able to get married, which is, I think he said there was a bit of pressure at that point. So it is incredibly important to every single one in this country, and it's also something that brings us together. The issue of mental health is one which was languishing out of public debate for many years, had always been the Cinderella, and a huge credit is due to Norman Lamb for the work that he did in bringing this to the fore of our debate. And I think now it is, we do not yet have the resources, we do not yet have the outcomes that are needed. And as in your areas, in my area, I see the stories of the child and adolescent mental health services where people are waiting for such an incredibly long time, the way in which if you are very, very ill mentally, then you will probably be seen. But for people that are, not quite ill enough, people with eating disorders told that they're not quite thin enough to get treatment, which is just so perverse. There's still a lot to do, but at least that conversation is happening. So I do think that mental health, one of the big gaps is actually the public health side of mental health. How do we stop people getting very ill in the first place? How do we practice good well-being that helps every single one of us to maintain good mental health? Or when things are starting to go wrong, get some early intervention. And I mean, the Talking Therapies IAPT programme has been pretty revolutionary in helping people, but it took a long time to get that working, and even so the waiting lists are far too long. And it brings us back to that resourcing issue, not just for mental health, but for the NHS as a whole, and indeed for social care. We as a party have set out our plans through the Health Commission of an amazing group of experts, and we have set out clearly that we would put a penny on income tax to help fund the NHS. And I think that's positive, that we're prepared to have that difficult discussion about, if we're wanting better services, having to raise the income in order to do that. I think in the next few years we're probably going to have to be more radical than that too. Because particularly if you look at the looming social care crisis, there's going to need to be resolution. And that can only be achieved on a cross-party basis. It's not something where I've got a secret plan written on the back of my notepad here, because actually it's something that we need to build a lasting consensus that can survive different governments of different political colours. And I think there is an urgent need to bring people together in Parliament and beyond to do that, which Tim Farron very ably set out this week at Prime Minister's Questions, and I hope that we will be able to continue to try to make that happen.
I mentioned in my opening remarks how important the NHS has been to my life. And I particularly remember when my mother was seriously ill and we were nursing at home, and how we were utterly dependent on the NHS. And in my constituency work for the people I represent, I know how it is crucial to make sure we have a fairer society, that people can have free access to quality healthcare. But I particularly knew that it was important for me when I was looking through a photo album with my grandmother about 15 years ago, and I came across a press cutting. Now, my father had died when I was 4, so I never really knew him. But in this press cutting, it was from the Sutton Ashfield Gazette, and it was about a tea party in Sutton Ashfield, the Liberal Tea Party. And my father was speaking at it. And he said, only the Liberals understand the NHS. I agree with my father. And when it comes to mental health, it's been the Liberal Democrats who led the way. Joe was quite right to pay tribute to Norman Lamb, but I also want to pay tribute to Paul Burstow, who set the train running, and also to Nick Clegg, who fought for it around the cabinet table. We have a very proud record on this, and we need to develop that and show that we've got the policies and ideas to take that record forward. And I particularly think about children and adolescent mental health services, the CAMS. In my own constituency, the amount of time that young children are having to wait to see a specialist is absolutely outrageous. Now, the questioner asked, should we separate mental health service funding from the wider health service funding? I'm not actually sure that's the right thing to do. What I do think we need to do is focus on the staff. Because when you look at what's the problem for our mental health services, there's lack of trained staff. They reduce the amount in training places. And guess what? I'm going to relate this to Brexit. Because there are people crucial to our health service, particularly in the mental health services, who are EU citizens. And this government has made them feel unwelcome in our country. And that is an utter disgrace. And, you know, we may have some real fights on our hands. Imagine if Prime Minister Johnson does a trade deal with President Trump and puts the NHS up for sale. We have a real fight to secure our NHS. And it starts with fighting for funding. We have been quite right in talking about increasing income tax by a penny in the pound to get money for NHS and social care. That's absolutely right. But the commission that the Vince put forward with Norman was going further and talking about a dedicated NHS tax. I think that could be extremely popular, and I think we should look at that in detail for our next manifesto. Yeah. But I want to say one final thing, and that is about the link between NHS and social care. Because the problem we're having in my constituency, I bet it's in all your communities, is that local government has been smashed by this government. And the cuts to local authorities are affecting the basic social care. And that affects the NHS because they are interlinked. We know that. We've argued for integration of the NHS and social care for years, and we need to push that argument. But when the Tories talk about their 10-year NHS plan, which, by the way, is not very ambitious if you read it, they completely exclude local government from it. That is an outrage. Without local government, without fully funding local government and the social care, we will never sort out the needs of people who are elderly, who are in crisis, and never give them the health and social care that they deserve. We must campaign for it. It's our Liberal cause.
Well, there was a supplementary. I don't know if Maria Turner is here, but I'll read out what she said. Will you ensure that we have a member of the parliamentary team as a named spokesperson on NHS and social care? You don't have to take long on answering this. It would be good if you didn't.
Should we say it together?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, we're moving to question 2. And question 2 is... Well, this is the lead question, really, from Councillor Jane Brophy, MEP. How do the candidates intend to tackle the climate change emergency? And our starter is Ed for this question.
The good news is we know how to fix it. And the good news is we have the technologies. The most amazing developments in the last few years on solar, on wind, and on batteries and storage. There's some more R&D we need to do, innovation, but we know that's happening, and it's happening far faster than people realize. So we know we can do it. The real challenge is, can we divert the money from the old dirty industries into the clean industries? It's an economic challenge. That's what the problem is. And the vested interests in the Tory party, in Whitehall, in the fossil fuel industries, and in our financial sector are holding up the change we need. So we need to be radical in the message that we give to the markets. That's what I've been talking about, decarbonising capitalism. What do I mean by that? I mean talking to the pension funds with the trillions that they have, the debt markets, the stock exchanges, the banks, and saying, you are going to have to switch your money over to clean technologies. How do we do that in a fair way? Well, first of all, we say, you've got to be transparent. We are, by law, making you report on the fossil fuel investments that are in your business plans, in your balance sheet, so investors know that they're investing in fossil fuels. so people can choose not to. So real transparency, and there's not that at the moment, it's a disgrace. But we should also make sure that the climate change risk that comes from those fossil fuel assets is also transparent and has to be factored in. What do I mean by that? I'm sorry if I'm getting technical, but this is really important. We need to make sure that their business plans are Paris Treaty compliant. If we're saying to the world and trying to have a policy that we're going to meet Paris targets or better, how can we allow businesses not to have business plans that aren't Paris compliant? So they need to publish those. And moreover, the accountancy and audit profession needs to have to report on whether the value of that company is based on being Paris compliant. Because at the moment, the investments they've made in fossil fuels are not written down to zero as they should be by 2050. They still have value. And so people think these companies are valuable, but they should not be if we did our proper analysis right and really decarbonise capitalism. And I've been talking to people in the city. I've met the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. We've discussed how we can do this. And if we do this, friends, dramatic things will happen. Not only will we have the money to invest in the green technologies, but we'll create the green jobs as well. When I was Secretary of State, we managed to get Siemens to invest in Hull, in an offshore wind turbine blade factory. That brought 1,000 jobs, and it's transforming Hull. And if you see cities and towns like Grimsby and Lowestoft, the renewable industry is revitalising those. So if we can get this shift that I'm talking about, we can see jobs in the regions across the whole of the United Kingdom. I think it is a very attractive policy agenda for us. It's also essential, by the way, if you've got pensions, your pensions will be worthless if we don't do this. Because there's too much carbon. There's something called the carbon bubble. We've overinvested in it. When that goes pop, all those investments will be worthless. So there's a real economic financial reason to do this. So I think we know how to do it, but we need a radical party, the Liberal Democrats, to lead this. And we could transform Britain into a green economy with these sorts of ideas, but we could also transform the world. This is my final point. In London, 15% of fossil fuel investment worldwide is funded. Now, we only represent 1% of greenhouse gas emissions ourselves, but we're allowing the City of London to fund 15% of global fossil fuels. So if we act in our country, not only can we become the green economy of the world, but we can show and help the world go green too. So this is extraordinarily exciting. I think with these sorts of ideas, we can win these campaigns. We can have an economic policy that actually will make sense, produce jobs and prosperity, and lead the world. I think we can do it.
Well, in order to tackle the climate emergency, we need to do no less than change the way that we live, the way in which our economy works. And I think that is clearly challenging, because that's a big job that we have to do in a small space of time. But it's also exciting. It gives us opportunities to grow entirely new industries and to take advantage of other benefits that are knock-on benefits to other areas of our lives. As we take the fumes out of the fossil fuels out of the way in which we get about in our cars and buses and so on, we will also make our streets more pleasant places to be, and our towns and villages and the places we live healthier places for our children to play. So there's a lot to be gained here. Now, it's challenging because we need to do this in every single aspect of our society. So in terms of housing, we absolutely need zero carbon homes, but we also need to recognise that most of the homes already exist. And so we need a huge programme of retrofitting our homes to make them net zero carbon. And of course, in that is a huge jobs opportunity, as has recently been set out in a comprehensive report. Farming and agriculture will need to be transformed in the way it operates. Transport. You know, we've got the government, okay, going ahead with High Speed 2, but the uncertainty about that project and even the lack of ambition of that project. You know, a high-speed rail link between London, Birmingham and Manchester, well, great, that is a start, but it's a fraction of our country. It's a fraction of what we need. And you still have loads of Tory MPs standing up all the time, arguing about it and saying it doesn't need to happen, when we know it is vital for improving the way we get around and actually for giving us capacity for our local rail network to get people out of their cars. Industry's emissions are going to need to be hugely dealt with. That industry is going to need to transform, and some have already started doing that, and others that aren't able to keep up with the pace are going to find that they go out of business. Some industries might cease to exist entirely, and other companies are certainly going to come a cropper. And so we do need climate risk reporting so that investors can understand how to support greener assets that have more of a long-term future. And we need to change the way that we create energy. We are still going to need lots of energy, and we need a renewables revolution. And that's the reason that I think that we need to focus on offshore and onshore wind and solar, and even look at things like tidal. We've done a lot of that. Ed did some fantastic work at the Department for Climate Change, of course, since abolished by the Conservatives in its entirety. But we do need to do more. And when it comes to things like fracking or nuclear, you know, these are not the technologies that we should be investing in for the future, because we need the certainty for people to invest in renewables. And when it comes to the role of government, it is about setting clear, ambitious goals, putting in place the regulation and the framework so that investment can flow, and the confidence that those are the industries or the technologies that are going to be profitable for the future, so that that system works. But there's another job for us, and that's for us as a party, as campaigners, what we do best. I've been really energised by the School Strike for Climate, by the Extinction Rebellion protests. There is so much energy in this movement right now, and it is brilliant to see. I went down to the Extinction Rebellion. I took along my 5-year-old son, because this is about his future and his younger brothers, but I thought, I'm not going to take a baby, because, you know, it was a very, very hot day. That was a recipe for disaster. But Andrew and I sat under the shade of a tree, chatted to this guy who was part of the protest. He was telling Andrew all about lots of different environmental issues, and we need to open the minds of the next generation, and I think that that campaigning is so important. And I'm shortly going to be meeting with the senior campaigners within Extinction Rebellion who've made contact with me and asked to meet, and I think that relationship is going to be so important for our party to be at the heart of this green movement.
I can take supplementary questions. If there are questions on the environment or those green issues and matters which have been mentioned so far, then please give me a clear signal that you would like to ask one. Otherwise, we shall move on to our next question. I do see a hand. Well, funnily enough, it's from the questioner. Jane, there's a roving mic somewhere which will rove towards you with a bit of luck. I'm sure you will keep your question exactly as a question, and a very short one, Jane.
Thank you both for your answers. My supplementary question is, how do the candidates propose to work with the Green Party, if we should vote for the Green Party, and what kind of relationship would you see there?
Which one? Yes, Jane.
So I generally think that cooperating with other people where you agree is a good idea. And we don't agree with the Greens on everything, but we do agree we need to tackle the climate emergency, and we do agree that we want to stop Brexit. So we should work with them on those goals. Now, in Parliament, there's only really Caroline Lucas, and I have to tell you, I think Caroline Lucas is fantastic. I think she's great, find it very easy to work with her. The fact remains that the vast majority of the MPs in Parliament that are putting this as a priority are Liberal Democrat MPs, and that will continue to be the case. So we should feel confident that we are the party to tackle the climate emergency. And at the same time, from that position of strength, I mean, just look at the council elections with 704 gains, 2,500 councillors, what we're able to do in local government to make real progress. I know the work that Jackie Piercy's been doing on air quality has been groundbreaking. Right across the country, councils are doing huge amounts, Liberal Democrat councils, Liberal Democrat mayors in Watford and Bedford on sustainable transport. So we need to be making those things happen and working with others where we agree. And I think the key for me is that it needs to be up to the local parties who best understand their circumstances. I know in Oxfordshire, having spoken to Leila Moran, they had a situation where there were some wards that the Greens stood down in for Liberal Democrat candidates and other wards where the Lib Dems did likewise. It was done in a very democratic way. They had, if you like, mini Hustings events where local members came along and were able to listen to the potential candidates and then decide, and that's what they decided to do. In other parts of the country, local parties have said no to such arrangements, and I think that's as it should be. We're a democratic party. We generally have a mode of working with others where we agree, and we let local people make those decisions.
The key decision for our country is to stop Brexit. It's absolutely essential, and we must work with anybody and everybody to achieve that goal. And I think what we were a little sad on in the European elections was that Vince had put out the hand of friendship to the Greens and wanted a Remain alliance, which was, I think, very generous. But it wasn't taken up either by the Greens or Change UK. And so I think, you know, we've led on constructive politics, and that's quite right. And I think it should go beyond Brexit as well. I think the climate emergency, as Joe said, is so significant we need to work with everybody on it. The question I have, though, beyond that, is do you go to electoral pacts with the Greens? And I'm generally very, very nervous about electoral pacts because I think they basically don't work. I don't ever exclude them, but I really think we should think very hard before we do them. We made the right decision, I think, at the last election not to stand against Caroline Lucas in Brighton. That was a bit controversial, but I think it sent a signal of our intent about wanting to have pluralist politics and being prepared to recognise that there was an MP who was standing up for values that we shared. By the way, we weren't going to win it either, so that helped. But I think beyond that, at Westminster election, I think it's quite tough to see how you'd make it happen, to be frank. But I agree with Joe on local elections. Although I would probably counsel against it in broad terms, as leader, the idea that I would dare tell a local party what to do, that's not the style of leadership that I think Liberal Democrats expect from their leader. I think we should look at the experience, though, in a very hard-headed way, because the experience of pacts with the Greens at local government level hasn't always been a happy one. And I would urge, whether it's ALDC or the LGA, probably together, to look at that experience and get some real advice to local parties, so that if local parties are thinking about that, they really think about the issues that they've got to work through. Because we all know politics is often about people. And sometimes you find people in other parties who you actually really get on with, you trust them, and you can build alliances, and you can work together not just for one election, but over a period of time. And then there are other people, often sometimes in the same party, in the same area, who are very, very different. And I've seen in the Green Party people who I feel very comfortable with, Caroline Lucas, for example, and I've seen some who have very different views to Liberal Democrats, both being extraordinarily authoritarian on one level, and then extremely left-wing on another. And I remind you, there are two Green parliamentarians, Caroline Lucas in the House of Commons, who wants to stop Brexit with us, and then Baroness Jones in the House of Lords, who's in favour of Brexit. I'm not sure people know about that. So when I looked at the Green Party as a young person deciding whether I was going to join them back in the late 80s, I didn't like some of their philosophy, and I found them unattractive for one particular reason. At that stage, they were deeply anti-European. So let's remember the Greens are an odd vehicle, and let's be cautious before we rush into things.
We'll move on to our next question. A specific, but it's also going to be linked to a more general point. How do we turn back the rising tide of transphobia in our public and our press? And a wider question with the same content really. Our country is divided. How do we tackle the problem we have with the media and getting a fair representation? And on this occasion, it's going to be Joe to start.
Transphobia is a stain on our society. The fact that there are young people growing up who find themselves driven to try to commit suicide because the world that they inhabit is so unaccepting of who they are is something that should shame us all. And we have so far to go on trans rights and on trans people being understood and part of our society rather than being perceived as other. Now, I think we should have some cause for hope if you look at the gay rights movement and the way in which our country has moved on that issue in recent years. It's not that long since the civil partnerships legislation came in, and at the point that that happened, it was viewed that the country wouldn't have been ready for gay marriage. And then the way in which public opinion changed as we brought through the same-sex marriage legislation was in itself a fascinating thing. So I think there is cause for hope. But the trans rights are often being now caught up in this kind of far-right sort of rhetoric of trying to drive division. And I particularly think the way in which the media constantly likes to pit trans rights against women's rights is toxic. There is no contradiction. I've got a bit of a reputation. I'm a feminist, right? And, you know, trans women are women, right? It's that simple. This is a false fight. And I think that our party has been positive. When I look at what happens in the Labour Party, or I look at the current debate in the SNP on trans issues, I feel proud that as a party, we are by and large absolutely standing up for trans rights. But as I say, that is still unusual in our wider politics, and that tells us how far we have to go. So we do need to challenge in the press when the right of trans people to exist is seen as an acceptable question. We do need to challenge, and we do need to improve the rights. The update of the Gender Recognition Act is important. We should not let the other parties kick it into the long grass on either side of the border. And then that takes me to the wider issue of our divided country. And we are divided in so many different ways. And of course, how are we going to get through and punch through on the media? I think we have to fight harder. We've always had to fight hard for our media coverage. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we are so obsessed with our wonderful focus leaflets, because that is the one place that we know that we can get through to the public through the letterboxes without that filter of whether the media will actually put us on the television. But I do have a high profile in the media. You will understand this from watching. I have been on countless programmes in the last few weeks. I'm one of the people in our party that has been on Question Time the most. So I think it's about going there, being a good guest on the studio so that they want to invite you back. And we also need to be robust through the media office, and Sam Barrett, our Director of Communications, does this job well, but we always want to be doing as much as possible, and in fact has had success recently. So in the European election campaign, he challenged and went to the Director General of the BBC and got Vince on the MAR programme at a point when we would not otherwise have been on. In fact, they ended up extending the programme to make sure that we did it. So we've showed some success through the way our media team has worked. And then the final thing I would say is social media. Because this is where, again, a bit like our focus leaflets, but for a new generation, this is how we reach so many more people, both through paid advertising, which we are brilliant at, and Sky News had a great segment that showed quite how effective we were with, I think, 4,000 different adverts that we had expertly targeted to really get the maximum bang for our buck. But also making sure that the content we're producing, from nationally right through to the campaign about the number 15 bus in a particular constituency, the micro-targeting on those issues as well, we really can reach so many more people. And social media, for so many elections, was, is this going to be the social media election? Well, after the 2016 referendum, that's not a question people are asking anymore, and we need to make sure that we're absolutely at the top of that social media game to punch through.
When I launched my leadership campaign, I came up to Stockport to meet some Stockport members, but also to meet the Stockport youth panel. And we were talking about climate change, and we were talking about mental health. But one of the things that the young people wanted to talk about was some of their experiences of being bullied, attacked, beaten up for their sexuality. One young lady was lesbian. We had a trans member as well of the youth panel. And to hear their personal stories and to actually hear that their schools had not supported them was, I felt, absolutely shocking. And it showed how far we have got to go in our society before we are truly equal. And I take my views on this from my liberal philosophy. I don't think society defines us. I think we define ourselves. And true liberals who want freedom and want that equality, we should be saying to every individual, who do you want to be? And we need to win that argument at that deep level, as well as that argument in the media, as Joe said. And I think we need to be in the media making the arguments on issues like transphobia and showing that we're going to stand up for people who are being treated poorly. I talked in my opening remarks about being the champions for the victims of injustice. And we must do that wherever that is, whether it's for trans people, for the whole LGBT plus community, or for any minority that is suffering persecution, discrimination. We should be on their side. And that brings me to the issue of the divided country. I think we're divided in actually many ways. I think Brexit has exposed some divisions that were already there, but also created some as well. And the divisions that I worry about are divisions of inequality, where I think we have one of the most unequal societies in Europe. It is a scandal that 2 of our regions, London and the South East, are in the top 10 richest regions in Northern Europe, and 6 of our regions are in the bottom 10. That is a scandal. We are one of the most divided societies by wealth and income, and we have to be the champions to reduce that regional inequality. And there's another part of inequality which we've seen, and divisions that we've seen from the whole Brexit mess. And that relates to immigration. And it relates to the diversity, the wonderful diversity in our country that is being challenged by the right and being challenged by the Brexiteers and being used by them. And we have got to challenge that. And what's made me sick over years is the way that successive Conservative and Labour governments have appeased the Daily Mail. You know, there's a parallel with the appeasement of Hitler. You appease these right-wing bigots who sow prejudice and hatred, and they just continue. They want more. No more appeasement. We have got to make the case for the benefits of immigration, the benefits of diversity. And this one hopeful thing that I've seen through this whole Brexit mess has been changing attitudes to immigration. Because actually, when faced with the issue, do we want to get these EU people out of our country? Yes, there have been some bigots, we know them. But many people have changed their minds because they've seen, well, I didn't want that EU nurse, my nursing colleague, to leave. I don't want to turn against the husband of my neighbour who happens to be an EU citizen. People have begun to realise that actually the EU citizens live in our country are us. There's no division. There should never be a division. And so we have seen changes in the polls. And that gives me hope, and that makes me more confident that if we stand up for our values, for true liberalism, for true equality, we can win on those. And we can say to Nigel Farage and the Boris Johnsons, go. Your attitudes, we are going to defeat you. And we will use every breath in our body to defeat these divisive peddlers of hate and fear.
I'm going to move us on to our next question. We are in the Northwest, and so you would expect us to have a question which says, what ideas do you have to remedy the North-South divide? Will you support the three northern regions in working together, something which the Liberal Democrats have been working with other parties to achieve? And perhaps the really broad question, do you think this is the time for the UK to adopt a written constitution, perhaps with our regions built in? And, sorry, I should have made it clear that it's Ed to start.
Well, let's start with the written constitution. Back in 1990, I was involved in a piece of work that Paddy was very keen on, where we as a party produced the first ever written constitution. And it started off, "We the people." It was a wonderful document, "We the people." So we've already produced a written constitution. We should go back to that because that is the way to hold people to account. And one of the reasons I'm a liberal is I want to hold powerful people to account, be they in politics, be they in business, be they in organised labour. Powerful people need to be held to account to protect individuals. And a written constitution does that. We should be in favour of it. But let's talk about the Northwest. There's been a new project recently launched, I think it was launched this week or last week, called One North, Powering Up the North. That is absolutely something that Liberal Democrats should get behind. It talks about major transport projects, yes, but not just the ones that lead to London, the ones that connect up the north, the Transpennine. How dare Chris Grayling cancel that? He is not only the most shocking transport secretary ever, but he has betrayed the north. They made those promises and they failed to deliver them. We should champion those very important transport projects. But of course it goes way beyond transport. It is about ensuring that, yes, there's economic resources. So where could those resources come from? Well, I've written in the New Statesman this week that I think there should be almost a new contract with the regions and countries of the UK. And it's basically using the money that staying in Europe would give us. They put 25 billion aside to deal with the disaster of a no-deal Brexit. Now, 25 billion won't be enough, by the way. And if we avoid it, we'll have the 25 billion. And if we stay in the EU, most economists think we'd have a Remain dividend of 15 billion a year. I think we should say all of that money shouldn't be spent in London, but it should be spent in the regions of our country. Real money, real resources, are not spent by ministers in London, but given to local communities, to the local councils, and devolving more power with that money, so local people can make the choices in the way that huge dividend could be spent. So that would be a start. And I say only a start because we need to do more. I'm not going to rehearse the argument I gave on decarbonising capitalism, because you probably don't want to hear about pension funds anymore. However, I do urge you to think about a green economy and how many benefits that would bring to the regions and to the north. So we have to take this seriously as a party. And my final point about why we need to take it seriously is not just because it's the right thing to do for the north, but if we want to heal the divisions in our country that are being exposed by Brexit, we have to do this. Nothing has distressed me more than seeing our divided country in the last 3 years. Seeing families divided, work colleagues divided, the country divided geographically. I don't know about you, but it's really distressed me. People who vote to leave, they're our brothers and our sisters. They're our friends, they're our countrymen and countrywomen. We should care about them as much as we care about Remainers. We're all human beings living in this country. And we need to be the party, yes, that stops Brexit, yes, that has a people's vote, but in the way we behave, in the way we talk, and the policies that we promise, and the policies we promulgate, we must make sure they are reaching out to our Leave brothers and sisters, to our Leave communities, so we can bring this country together.
Well, I had a bit of a fangirl moment earlier. I went to an event at Gaskell House, which some of you will know has been refurbished, the home of Elizabeth Gaskell, who was an author. I read and studied her amazing novel, North and South, when I was at school, and it's been set up exactly how she left it. And of course, that was a tale of, the differences in life between, in that case, Manchester, Milton Northern, and a small village in the southwest. But this divide really does exist, and I kind of see it from different sides. Obviously, I spend quite a lot of time in London, but I came here to the north today, but I travelled south in order to do so from Glasgow. So there's quite a lot of north in our country beyond Manchester as well. I wanted to just tell you a story. When I studied in London at the London School of Economics, and when I graduated, I decided that I wanted to work for a small company, and it was a scheme that was being run by Sheffield Hallam University to match up graduates with SMEs, and it would be a particular company in South Yorkshire, and I moved to East Yorkshire. And when I told my fellow students at LSE that was what I was going to do, and they were all off going to be management consultants and actuaries and so on, they just could not compute. They just could not understand why I might actually want to leave London and go and live somewhere else. And I do think that sometimes there is a feeling in London, there's a bit of a bubble, that it is the centre of the world, and even the way that things get organised, and people sort of say, well, it's on this day and at this time, and they don't even put a location like what city it's going to be in, because the default is just London, because everything happens in London. The world does not revolve around London. Clearly, it revolves around Glasgow. So I think it's very important. And actually, it was interesting when I was at the Department of Business. I looked around my fellow ministers, and every single other minister was basically within an hour's drive from London in the Department of Business. And I think that gives a kind of perspective on the world. So we do need, when we talk about investment, you look at the billions that have been poured into Crossrail in London, which is an important project. But then, as I say, that reticence about the money going into high-speed rail, or indeed other rail projects in the north. So we do need to have that investment right across our country. And also to take pride in a sense of place and community. I remember when the Commonwealth Games were on in Manchester in 2002, some of you will recall, and it, you know, what that did for the city was just amazing, and the whole country kind of oriented and turned towards Manchester and saw what this vibrant city had to offer. And I saw it the same in Glasgow in 2014 when we hosted the Commonwealth Games. So I think that open mind to what these amazing places do, and yes, they should be working together across the regions of the north, because most people don't actually put themselves into a kind of European Parliament or municipal region kind of category, when actually if you're in Manchester, then heading across to Sheffield is, you know, it's not that difficult to do, to go and see friends or whatever. I know, it's shocking, but yeah, it has been done. I've driven that road, not a great road, but so I think that's important. But I think the other divide, though, I would just caution against saying that it's all north-south, because earlier today I was speaking to Chris, one of our councillors in Liverpool, and he made the point that his particular ward, the average house price is about 5 times as much as the average house price in other wards in Liverpool. And I think even within our cities and within our local authorities, we have this division that is a real problem for us. And that we as Liberal Democrats need to reach across and make sure that we are working in those communities. And that, it's kind of in our backyard too. And we can become a bit blasé to that sometimes, when you've got people, you know, living and working kind of cheek by jowl, but living entirely different lives. And just the final story I would tell from that is just sometimes when I'm, you know, in London and I've been at, you know, big law firms or management consultancy practices, and you kind of go in and you're meeting somebody and you wait in the reception, and it's marble and there's glass walls and really kind of funky chairs, modern art type stuff, different colours in the reception area. And you sometimes just look around and it's like money's dripping from the walls of these buildings. And then you think, who comes to clean this building? And what are they being paid? How do they possibly afford to live here? And then you realise, well, they don't. So how many hours are they travelling from in order to get here and do that job for minimum wage? And I think that division in our country is probably one of the most potent.
We've got time for a contribution from the audience, a question on the northern theme. I see a hand at the back. I see 2 hands at the back. I see several hands at the back. We're not going to get you all in, I'm very sorry. I will take the gentleman on the back row there.
Yes, I'm from Huddersfield. I travelled to Middlesbrough, I travelled to Wigan, I travelled to St Helens, I travelled to Rotherham, and I want to know how you two would speak to the people who see probably the Liberal Democrats as being a party of Remain, but who don't understand where they're coming from. Because when you go to somewhere like Middlesbrough, you see a place like the Dementors have been, where all the life is sucked out. So how do we speak to those people who don't think that we as a party are the party for them?
Okay, just hold it there. Let's have a look at the... there was another hand there. Yep.
Mine is how can we make public transport in the north cheaper, more affordable and cleaner for everyone in the north?
Okay. This isn't restricted to men. Was there any other hand up there? No, if not, I'll take the gentleman at the back.
Yeah. I wonder if we have answered the question, which is about the Constitution. Can we have a federal Constitution?
Can you speak into the mic?
So I can, I've got it, yes. The question was about the Constitution, and I wonder, are you envisaging a federal Constitution? One that would give the North the sorts of powers that Scotland's got, so we can take some real decisions here. A Constitution which doesn't devolve power from London, but which entrenches it here of its own right.
Yeah. So first of all, you're quite right. I didn't do the written constitution bit, so apologies for that. Yes, absolutely. I'm a federalist, and I think we have experienced in Scotland devolution for the last 20 years, and there's been a lot of success of what we've been able to do. And I think we are one of the most centralised countries, or England is one of the most centralised countries in all of Europe. Some people argue for an English Parliament. I mean, if people in England really want that, it's not for me as a Scot to say no, but I would note that going from centralisation for a country of 60 million to a centralisation for a country of 50 million doesn't seem like power genuinely getting back out to the different corners of the nation. So, I think we should have a written constitution. There's been excellent work done in our party, not least by Paul Tyler, on how we can reform the constitution. And this idea of asymmetric devolution, I think, is the way forward. I don't think there should be any reason why it has to be one size fits all, that because this part of the country wants this set of powers, that has to be everywhere. There might be places that are wanting more or less, and we should be, as Liberals, happy with that. It should be about the consent of the public in that particular area, and it needs to be meaningful, unlike the North East referendum back in, I think it was 2004. So in terms of the public transport, I'll answer that one fairly quickly. I think to make it cheaper, affordable and cleaner, it needs investment. You need many more people using it. To have many more people using it, you need to make it much more reliable, more frequent. Yeah, London's a good model. London public transport works really, really well. And the answer is that it is subsidised. And so basically, good public transport is a public good. We shouldn't necessarily expect that it will be funded through a model of the train and bus fares will make it all work. It's something which is part of our national infrastructure that the government ought to be deliberately investing in to make our cities and towns connect better with one another. And just finally on the issue about the gentleman from Huddersfield, about how to speak to people, well, I would start by listening. We are the party of community politics. It's what we do. And what we often do first in an area, in a new ward, is we do a survey. We listen to people. And I sort of cut my political teeth in East Yorkshire. I stood in 2001 in East Hull. That's an area which hadn't been, strong Liberal Democrat territory. But how did we dig in there to the stage that we won lots of councillors and we took control of Hull City Council the following year? It was by getting out to communities and listening to people's concerns. And they might or might not agree with us on Brexit. And you know what? In this country, we don't all have to agree on everything. That's actually a good thing. And we just need to get better at disagreeing well with one another and not assuming that if someone disagrees with us on something that they, must wear horns or whatever. So they might disagree with us on that. But I think as what's shown in local elections is that where we listen and we address the concerns that people genuinely have, Liberal Democrats can absolutely win.
I think the Leave voters in Middlesbrough, it's going to be tough to start when we talk about Brexit. I think that issue is going to be difficult to have those conversations for some time. And let's just be honest about that. But the community politics Joe talked of is exactly the way to go. And when I talked about how we end some of the regional divides, I think if we give real money to towns and to cities and to local authorities so that they can make decisions with their citizens about how they make those towns and cities nicer places to live in, I actually think that is a critical part of it. People need to feel that where they live is loved, where they lived is cared for. And, it's not for me to say what Middlesbrough needs, but, I don't care whether it's a leisure centre, a park, a playground, a community centre, those sorts of things that build that social capital that can rebuild towns and cities that have been forgotten. That's the sort of thing that I know that our parties campaign for. And when you do it, you can change people's aspirations, you can change their attitude. So it will be a long conversation, but local Liberal Democrats campaigning on the ground, responding to what people want to see their communities, how they want to see their communities develop. That is the way forward. And I'm quite attracted by a number of ideas that I've seen around the world, actually, about how we use new technology to engage communities better. It may seem a very odd reference, but it's quite a northern place. It's Reykjavik in Iceland. And when they had their existential crisis after the banking crisis in 2007-8, they looked at their whole political process again. And they produced an online platform for the citizens of Reykjavik to put forward ideas about how they wanted to change their community. And what happened was the ideas were put onto this platform and people could vote them up and down. And after every month, the top ideas that the local community said, these are what we want, they went to Reykjavik City Council, and Reykjavik City Council had to consider them and take them forward. And in nearly 10 years of this platform called Better Reykjavik, nearly 80% of the residents have engaged in this platform at least once. And over 600 projects have been taken forward that came from the residents. Now that way of empowering seems to be a very Liberal Democrat way. I'm not saying it's the only way. But if we're going to reach out to those communities, show we care, it's about resources and it's about giving them a voice and showing that their views matter and can lead to changes and can lead to decisions in their own community. And I think we should be the champions of that type of politics. When it comes to transport, I mean, well, first of all, we need to get rid of the current Secretary of State for Transport. Apparently, he was going to apply to the toy leadership contest, but he was waiting for a ferry and it just didn't exist. And then he got on a train, but it was delayed. And he had to take a bus replacement service, and last time he was seen somewhere near Maidstone. So, we've got to get the politics right. But clearly, to get the sort of public transport system you're wanting, it's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of money. But it's right that we should invest. And first of all, borrowing costs are at historic lows. This is the moment for public investment in long-term economic investments will show returns over decades. So we should be doing a huge amount in transport investments and not it being paid but through the ticket box, through the revenue box, but through the borrowings that only a national government can do. Reopening beach enclosures, but possibly. I think one by one, let's have a look at them. But I would want to make the economic case for that transport investment in a way that's not normally made. People worry about the productivity problem in our country. And there are many reasons and many ways about how you improve economic productivity. One of them is a decent transport system that people can afford to use. If you look at all the Keynesian economic analysis over the years, when you do big public investment in transport systems, you get a return to the economy and society over a many-fold over years, primarily by making people more productive. So we need to make the economic case for major transport investment, and I think the case has never been stronger.
Thank you.
Federal Constitution, I've got to deal with that one and then I will shut up. And the reason why I want to deal with the Federal Constitution was I was shadowing John Prescott at the time of the Regional Assembly referendum in the North East. And that was an interesting experience. He doesn't like Liberals, as he calls us. And that went down very badly and it was lost heavily. So why I'm a federalist, I think we need to look at and learn the lessons from that experiment, because if we don't, we'll get very bad reaction and people will say, all you want is another tier of politicians. We don't want another tier of politicians, that's what they'll say. And so when we think about this, we've got to think very, very creatively. And I would first of all want to strengthen local government. And any written constitution, I want to make local authorities having a constitutional setting rather than a statutory setting. It's been outrageous the way national government has played around with our local authorities, quite disgraceful way. So yes, a federal constitution, but we as a party need to debate this in a very open and mature way, because the regional assembly approach that was tried 15 years ago was not popular.
I was doing my best to fit in 2 more questions, but we might only get 1. I'm sorry about that. It depends how quickly how short the answers are, whether you get a second additional question. So let's see how we go. As leader of the Liberal Democrats, how would you manage the conflict between a party with limited resources and being able to encourage people with family and caring commitments to be involved and valued? And tagged on to that, what about tackling child poverty and in-work poverty? And it's Joe to go.
Right. Well, and do this very briefly. Right. So there's lots of issues here. I'll just take them in the order they were asked. I think that we have sometimes asked too much of our candidates in this party. A familiar piece of advice at party training sessions is you've got to be unreasonable. Ask people to do unreasonable things. And I kind of get that that is a good track for winning. I mean, it's how I won my seat, right? I won my seat in 2005 and just dedicated, my entire time to winning my seat. And apart from, a day job that I did between 9 and 5, but I deliberately chose a job that I could do between 9 and 5, and all of the rest of the time was basically belonged to the Liberal Democrats. But I think we miss out on huge numbers of people who would be amazing representatives because they cannot make that level of commitment. And it might be that they have family and caring commitments. It might be that they're running a business or that they have a job that they cannot fit into the hours of 9 until 5. And I just think that we do not want to narrow our talent pool in that way. So the answer is that it has to be about the team, not just the candidate. Many hands make light work. And we are a growing party. We should be confident about that. And we should be involving our new members. Some of you will be here tonight and will have recently joined the party. You are very, very welcome. And I want people to be able to be in the Liberal Democrats and do the bit of politics that they want without feeling that they have to subcontract their entire life to the Liberal Democrats. Even though those of you that do, that is very much appreciated. Thank you. So we just need to get better at building bigger teams and not expecting so much of any one individual cog in that team. And it might be candidates, or it might be the agent, or it might be the local party chair. But if we can involve more people, that is ultimately the answer to that. Child poverty and in-work poverty are both things that should give us huge pause for thought. In the 5th richest economy in the world, that we can have so many people struggling to eat, to heat their homes, to get by, to make sure their kids have got shoes to wear to school that don't let the rain in when they jump in puddles. And we haven't been good enough at doing this. I think there's fundamental change needed. We have a system where basically employers, both in the public and private sector, are subsidised by our government through tax credits because we accept and we know that you cannot live and raise a family and look after various people in a household if you're working full-time on the national minimum wage. And I kind of think there's something fundamentally wrong about that system. And we need to find a way of changing the economic model so that people are employed and that is money that they can live on. Now, there's different ways of looking at how you do this. Some countries are toying with a universal basic income. There's a pilot in Glasgow of that. I think there's some downsides with it too. Some concerns that actually it can end up being regressive. But I do think that we should be looking at innovative new economic ideas rather than thinking that the answer is just tinkering with the system that we have. Because I think the system that we have is fundamentally broken and does not work for just too many people. So there's an economic council that Vince has set up, that I'm on, that Chris Fox chairs, that is taking advice from esteemed economists with some new and radical ideas. And I think we as a party need to, through our policy engagement, need to be looking for those radical ideas and taking them forward, seeing the pilots of these things. That is ultimately how I think we will address these stains in our conscience of in-work poverty and child poverty.
think the point about candidates who are asked to do too much is a incredibly important point. When I won my seat back in 1997, I was so pleased the election wasn't going to go on any longer. I was absolutely and utterly exhausted. But I was a single man with no children, and I don't think I could do what I did back then now with 2 children. And so we really have to understand where individual candidates are and give them the support, and we need to train our agents and our teams and our local parties to recognise that we need to have MPs and councillors of all different types. We need to be a hugely diverse, and if a candidate has got particular needs, it might be a disability, for example, we need to respond to that and not to expect them to be able to do everything like the perfect candidate who works 24/7, 365 days a year. We've just got to be real about that, and that was certainly my experience. The only thing I want to challenge is limited resources. We've got to get more resources in our party. We have got to fundraise like never before, and the wonderful news is I think we can now. It'll be one of my top priorities as new leader. I don't know if you noticed, but we're ahead in the polls. and when you go to businesses who like our European message, when you went to them last year, they're like, well, you're at 7% in the poll, come on, we're not going to give money to you. Now, they can give money to us. Now we have a story to tell. And I think that's quite exciting. And so a real priority is to get that pot of money increased. Let me talk about in-work poverty first of all. Just give me an example when I was Secretary of State. I said to my permanent secretary, I want every single person in this department to pay the London living wage. And they said, well, all the civil servants are. I said, I'm not bothered about the civil servants. Well, I was, but I said, what about the security staff? What about the catering staff? What about the cleaning staff? And you know what? They weren't paid the London living wage. And I said, I wanted to make sure they were. Oh, terribly difficult, sir. Terribly difficult, Minister. We've got joint contracts with DEFRA, and we'd have to speak to the Secretary of State for DEFRA, a certain Owen Patterson. So I said, well, if we must speak to him, but let me make it clear, whether he agrees or not, you're doing it. And the Permanent Secretary wasn't terribly happy about this. Anyway, Owen Patterson didn't want to do it. What a surprise. And it hadn't been done anywhere in Whitehall. But I insisted. And every time they delayed, I said, when are you going to do this? And we brought it in. I was the first Secretary of State to bring in the London living wage for the cleaners and the security staff and the caterers in my department. I was very proud on the day that I left, ahead of the 2015 election, because I was asked to go and see them by the manager who managed the cleaning and catering staff. And first of all, they wanted to thank me, which was very nice, but they had one really important message. Because we were now paid properly, we were staying. Previously, there's been a large turnover of staff because we weren't treating them properly. Now we were treating them properly, they were staying, and they were contributing, and that was wonderful. And that's why we need to tackle in-work poverty. But let's talk about child poverty, because that obviously is a stain on our society. And we've got to get serious about it. And there's many things we need to do. First of all, the benefit changes where not all the benefits are paid to the mother of children. That's got to change. We all know paying benefits to the mother of children is one of the most effective ways of making sure that benefits go to the children. The second thing is we need to have better systems for picking up those children who are most vulnerable. Because if you look at child poverty, it is associated with parents who've got mental health problems. That shouldn't surprise us. It's associated with parents who've got drug and alcohol problems. And, these are obvious things, but the society doesn't come round and put our arms around them and help those parents with those problems, because then you help the children. And so we need to be more responsive in the way we do social services and benefits. And the final thing that I want to say about child poverty is about housing. I do 2 advice surgeries a week in my constituency. I've done them for 20 years. I see a lot of people, probably spend about 6 hours a week talking to my constituents. And the biggest problem for the last 20 years has been housing. Poor housing, homeless people, overcrowding, it's everything. And when they have children, not surprising, those children have a tough time in that poor housing. I want us to be the party that says we are going to build council houses again. because I've looked at this a lot. In fact, I met my wife on a Liberal Democrat housing policy working group in 2003. That's how sad I am. And on that housing working group, we were saying, we've got to get real. We've got to have more social housing, and only the state can do it. We should do it.
Skilled answerers of questions keep going so they don't get another question, and they've achieved that. The question our two candidates would have had, I will give you in a moment, but we'll finish with each of the candidates having 2 minutes to make a final presentation. Ed went first at the beginning, and so Joe will go first at the end. But the question they didn't get, which you're not invited to answer, was, following the success of bollocks to Brexit, do you have any ideas for the next acceptable, legally not quite swear word for a general election manifesto? I'm sure.
Bugger Boris!
That's definitely a red card. Joe.
Well, there's an image I'm not going to get out of my head easily. Liberal Democrats, we need a leader who can cut through on the media, who can reach out to new voters and be a rallying point for our Liberal movement. Now, I'm sure everybody in this room, at one point or another, has written on Facebook or had a little bit of a rant to say, why aren't we getting more cut through in the media? Why are the Liberal Democrats not on? Well, in the last couple of weeks, I've been on LBC, Talk Radio, BBC Breakfast, Sky News, Channel 4, Radio 2, Newsnight, Good Morning Britain, Question Time, Mar, and the Today programme twice. I deliver cut through on the media for our party, for our Liberal Democrat messages. We need a leader who will reach out to new generations of voters, to people across party lines and across the entire country. I have a social media profile with nearly 70,000 people following me, and in the first few days of my campaign reached 3 million social media impressions. Across party lines, I have the strongest relationships in Parliament in different parties, and my non-tribal way of working is just what we need for this moment in our politics. And as someone who has lived and worked in Scotland, in Yorkshire, and in London, I can reach out to our whole country and understand the issues they are facing. We need a rallying point for our Liberal cause, for our Liberal movement at this moment of huge opportunity. And people are already coming to our party in their droves. On the day that I launched my campaign, 1,500 members joined our party. So I am the leader for our Liberal movement. We can do this, Liberal Democrats. We can do this together. So join me.
Friends, Conservative Party members will soon be holding meetings like this to choose a Prime Minister. But you also could be choosing a future Prime Minister. I sense the tectonic plates of British politics are moving. The Conservatives could split this year if Johnson wins. Labour could split as the hard left strengthens its grip. Already, lifelong Tory and Labour voters are coming to us. We need a leader able to seize this huge political opportunity, and I believe I'm that leader. Having sat at the cabinet table, having negotiated in government, the EU and the UN, and having made the right judgment calls over the years, I'm the leader for this historic moment. Take Change UK. I oppose talk of mergers and deals, and with Chucker joining the Liberal Democrats today, that was the right call. My CV for leader has more. Huge media experience over 20 years, from getting the better of John Humphreys many times, to getting so much applause on any questions last year that Jonathan Dimbleby had to stop the audience clapping me. A street-level winning campaigner with a track record of crafting distinctive messages, from the penny on income tax for education under Paddy to scrap council tax under Charles. Above all, I have the grit, the determination and the vision. On climate change, on the economy. Friends, our Liberal task today is to heal the divisions that Brexit and nationalism have sown across our country. I'm ready for that task. Back me in that campaign. We can win. Our country needs us.